we had 6 remaining at the end, and this rate of increase in sponge and decrease in coral slowed down quite substantially to only about 1.7 increase for sponge and 3.5% decrease for coral. So it seems like this growth had gone through its log phase and was kind of reaching some kind of equilibrium for the remaining, for the 6 that were remaining at the end of the first year. However, we did add 2 this year to make up for some of the quadrats we lost, and notice that this value was still showing us a large value of increase in sponge and a large value of decrease for the coral. So this first year change appears to be fairly standard throughout the study. Looking at the removal quadrats, as I said, there was an increase that was about 10% of available area for the sponge and a decrease of 6.3% of coral, non-significant change, but you can see that all but one of these showed a decrease in coral from the treatment of removing the sponge or damaging the coral in the process. The second year, again, this kind of moderated. The mean increase in coral continued, but was about 6% of the available area, and the decrease in coral was substantially lower at 1.4. Now, along the way, we found a new method of trying to deal with this removal management problem, and it came from a suggestion from an email from a fellow who'd seen the results of a workshop that we gave on this over about a year ago. He suggested that we should expose the sponge to air because he had trouble keeping sponges in his aquarium when they were near the air bubbler. And at first I thought it was somewhat ridiculous, but then I started thinking, how might we use this? And we developed a method of air injection using a bone necrosis needle and air from our air tanks, which uses it up real fast, by the way. But this is what happens for 4 quadrats, where we injected them on May 17th and came back on July 10th, and were very disappointed to see there was absolutely no change whatsoever. We had previously done a couple of quadrats where we first removed the surface of sponges and injected, and we found very good, and then injected with air, and we found very good results of that. So we tried, well, we'll just try it again, and come back a month later, and you can see substantial decrease. You can actually see the remains of the sponge spicules, and if this were a little larger. And this continued to stay, in fact, decrease a little further by the end of the study in November. So the amount of time that required for this process, if you did mechanical pretreatment, it was about 4 hours per meter square. But if with just using the air injection and moving on, you could take care of a meter of sponge, or a quadrat containing a meter of sponge in about an hour and a half or so. So this does show some hope as a possible means of controlling this beast at least at the fringes where it's establishing itself into new areas. And who knows if it has some potential in actually removing it from places where it's achieved some level of abundance. So this is what it looked like. You can see that there was a substantial decrease in the amount of area in the sponge from the May to November, about 11 or 12% of the available area. And when you look at it in terms of what's left from what started, there was actually a decrease to about half in the first quarter, and still about 42% of the sponge was lower than when you started at the end of the study. And best of all, this actually was much less damaging to coral, to the point that you had actually increases in coral cover from the treatment. So much less damaging, perhaps greater potential for use. So conclusions: the increases in sponges and decreases in coral cover continued through the second year on the permanent quadrats, which had been established at the beginning, but somewhat lower rates. Air injection has some promise as a control. It's a lot more time efficient and it's less damaging. And it needs further testing to see if this is a truly effective and feasible method. Finally, the aspect of is this a transferable technology, the CPC analysis. This is results of comparison of my analysis of the permanent photoquadrats for the entire year versus Jamie's. You can see very tight agreement, highly significant regression, and Brandt's explained of 96%. That's almost unheard of for biological data. Somewhat lower results of R-square of 0.9 or so, but still highly significant relationship between estimates of coral cover, which is a little harder to differentiate between the live and the dead, especially if you don't have the highest quality image to work with. So my conclusion of that, this is a transferable technology, methodology, and it doesn't take more than one training session to take a completely naive person and instruct him in the method. So general conclusions. Both the phototransects using 50-meter linear phototransects and permanent photoquads suggest that Kane'ohe is increasing and is spreading in Kane'ohe Bay. Can it be managed and controlled? Possibly. That we still need some more information on this, but the air injection shows a promise as a control measure, but it requires repeated applications because these quadrats, which were air injected back in March or May, have already showing recovery, as did the mechanical removal. So it seems something that you would have to continue to stay after over a period of time until you had beat the thing down to a point where it was not coming back anymore. And to determine the effectiveness, there needs to be a pilot study to either do more quadrats, as we've done, or better, to set up maybe a test reef, try and remove all the sponge on it, analyze the time required, and then over at least a 2-year period of time, see how much recovery the sponge occurred. Acknowledgements, HCRI and NOAA for funding, the DAR invasive response team, and Joanne Leong from HIMB for providing access to HIMB facilities. Thank you.